My name is Laverne, and I'm 53 years old. Right now, I'm sitting in my son's living room with two German shepherds staring at me like I hold the secrets to the universe. Bruno and Zeus have been my companions for the past 3 days, while Marcus is away on business in Denver. When my son asked me to house sit and care for his dogs for 2 weeks, I felt honored. After years of distance between us, this felt like trust, like he finally saw me as someone reliable again. The house feels different when he's not here quieter somehow, and I've been enjoying the peaceful routine of morning walks and evening cuddles with these gentle giants. But sometimes the most ordinary moments lead to the most extraordinary discoveries. Before I continue with what happened next, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Please hit that like button if you've ever felt that warm feeling of being trusted by someone you love, and don't forget to subscribe because what I'm about to share will completely change how you think about family loyalty. Marcus has always been driven. At 28, he's already established himself as a successful software engineer, living in this beautiful 3-story townhouse in one of the city's most desirable neighborhoods. The modern interior reflects his personality perfectly. Clean lines, minimal clutter, everything in its designated place. Smart home technology controls the lighting, temperature, and security system, and there's a small but perfectly manicured garden where Bruno and Zeus spend their afternoons lounging under the oak tree. Our relationship hasn't always been smooth sailing. When Marcus moved out for college and then landed his first job across the state, we grew apart. Those phone calls became shorter and less frequent. Holidays felt strained. Conversations stayed surface level. I blamed myself, mostly wondering if I'd been too protective when he was younger, too involved in his decisions. Maybe I pushed him away without realizing it. But recently, everything changed. Over the past 6 months, Marcus started calling more often. He'd drive the 2 hours to visit me on weekends, sometimes bringing takeout from my favorite Chinese restaurant. He seemed genuinely interested in my life, asking about my part-time job at the local library, my book club meetings, even my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson's ongoing feud with the Homeowners Association. These conversations felt natural, easy, like we were finally connecting as adults, rather than just mother and son. When Marcus called 3 weeks ago explaining his Denver project, I could hear the stress in his voice. This was a major contract that could significantly advance his career, but it meant 2 weeks away from home. Bruno had recently recovered from surgery for a torn ligament, and Zeus suffered from severe separation anxiety that worsened in unfamiliar environments. Boarding them wasn't an option. "Mom, I know it's a lot to ask," Marcus said, his voice carrying that vulnerable tone I remembered from his childhood. "But Bruno and Zeus know you. They trust you, and honestly, you're the only person I trust with my home." Those words melted my heart completely. After years of feeling like an outsider in his life, being asked to care for his most precious possessions felt like a gift. I packed my bags that same evening, excited about spending time in his space, learning more about the man my little boy had become. The first 2 days passed peacefully. I established a routine that worked for all three of us. Morning, walks around the neighborhood at 7:30 sharp, breakfast for the dogs, followed by playtime in the garden, afternoon naps while I read on the comfortable leather sofa, evening walks before dinner. Both dogs seemed content with the arrangement, and I found myself genuinely enjoying their company. Bruno, the larger of the two, had a gentle soul and would rest his massive head on my lap while I watched television. Zeus, more energetic and playful, entertained me with his attempts to catch squirrels that clearly had no intention of being caught. Living in Marcus's space gave me insights into his daily life that our recent phone calls hadn't revealed. His refrigerator held carefully organized meal prep containers and an impressive collection of craft beer. His bookshelf contained technical manuals mixed with classic literature, suggesting depths to his interests I hadn't known about. Family photos sat prominently on the mantelpiece, including several of us from his childhood, that made my heart swell with nostalgia. Everything felt perfect. I felt useful, trusted, and closer to my son than I had in years. Looking back now, I realize this contentment made what came next even more devastating. Thursday morning started like any other. I woke at 6:30, made coffee in Marcus's fancy espresso machine that had taken me 2 days to figure out, and prepared breakfast for Bruno and Zeus. After our morning walk, I found myself with extra energy and decided to do something special for Marcus's return. His home office, while generally neat, could use some organizing. Papers were scattered across his desk, and dust had accumulated on the shelves. I thought surprising him with a clean workspace would be a nice welcome home gesture. The office reflected Marcus's professional success. A large mahogany desk dominated the room, flanked by built-in bookshelves filled with programming guides, business text, and various awards from his company. His computer setup looked like something from a science fiction movie, with multiple monitors and equipment I couldn't begin to identify. As I began organizing the papers on his desk, most seemed routine: client proposals, technical specifications, printouts of code. But one item caught my attention immediately. Nestled between a stack of invoices and a software manual was a manila folder with my name written across the tab in Marcus's distinctive handwriting, Laverne Henderson. My heart skipped several beats. Why would Marcus have a folder with my name on it? My first thought was, perhaps he'd been planning some kind of surprise, maybe researching vacation destinations for a mother-son trip or investigating care options for when I got older. The optimistic part of my brain suggested it might contain sentimental items, maybe copies of old letters I'd written during his college years or documents related to some thoughtful gift he was planning. But something about finding it felt wrong. The folder was thick, substantial, suggesting more than just a few sentimental keepsakes, and it was filed among his business documents, not in a personal drawer or memory box where I might expect family mementos to live. I stood there for several minutes, folder in hand, wrestling with my conscience. Respect for Marcus's privacy battled against burning curiosity and a growing sense of unease. The rational part of my mind insisted I should put it back where I found it and forget about it entirely. Children deserve their privacy, even adult children. But another voice, quieter but more insistent, whispered that something wasn't quite right. Recent conversations began replaying in my mind with new context. Marcus had been asking more questions about my finances lately, wondering about my retirement savings, the value of my house, whether I'd updated my will recently. At the time, these seemed like natural concerns from a caring son. Now they felt more pointed, more purposeful. There had also been strange phone calls. Twice in the past month, Marcus's phone had rung during our visits, and both times he'd stepped outside to take the call. When I asked about them afterward, he'd been vague, mentioning something about work consultations. But the conversations I could overhear didn't sound like discussions about software development. I decided to compromise with my conscience. I would wait until evening, give myself time to think rationally about whether opening the folder was justified. If I still felt this nagging concern after sleeping on it, then maybe my instincts were telling me something important. The rest of the day dragged endlessly. I tried to focus on the dogs, took them for an extra long walk, played fetch in the garden until Zeus collapsed in exhausted contentment. But the folder remained on my mind constantly. During dinner, I found myself staring at Marcus's empty chair, wondering what secrets might be hidden in his organized, successful life. As evening approached, the feeling of unease only intensified. Something was definitely not right, and I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep without answers. At midnight, I finally gave in to my instincts. Bruno and Zeus were sleeping peacefully in their beds near the fireplace as I sat at the dining room table with the manila folder, my hands trembling slightly as I opened it under the soft light of the table lamp. The first documents seemed innocent enough, almost boring in their ordinariness. Copies of my birth certificate, social security card, driver's license. Information that any caring son might keep for emergencies or family record keeping. My initial relief was short-lived as I dug deeper and found detailed financial information that no son should possess without explicit permission. Bank statements from my checking and savings accounts going back 6 months. Copies of pay stubs from my part-time library job. Documentation of my pension benefits. Most disturbing, a property assessment of my house with estimated market value circled in red ink. These weren't documents someone keeps for sentimental reasons or emergency contacts. This was a complete financial profile compiled with obvious purpose and intent. My hands began shaking as I found the next section: legal documents. A draft of a will that I had never seen before, naming Marcus as my sole beneficiary. Research printouts about conservatorship laws, specifically focusing on obtaining guardianship over elderly parents. Information packets from several nursing homes in the area with pricing information and availability schedules highlighted. The most chilling discovery was a collection of printed emails between Marcus and someone named Attorney Davidson. The subject lines alone made my stomach lurch: family planning consultation, conservatorship procedures, and, most devastatingly, managing mother's affairs. I opened the first email with trembling fingers. Mr. Henderson, thank you for consulting with our firm regarding your mother's situation. As discussed, establishing conservatorship requires demonstrating that the individual is no longer capable of managing their own affairs. Documentation of memory issues, poor financial decisions, or inability to maintain their living situation will strengthen your case significantly. Please compile any evidence of these behaviors and forward them to our office. Marcus's response was even worse. Thank you for the guidance. My mother has been showing signs of forgetfulness lately, and I've been documenting incidents. She's also been making some questionable financial choices. I believe we'll have sufficient evidence to proceed within the next few months. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. Forgetfulness. Questionable financial choices. I pride myself on my sharp memory and careful money management. I balance my checkbook to the penny every month, never miss bill payments, and maintain a detailed budget that allows me to save money even on my modest library salary. More emails revealed the scope of Marcus's deception. He had apparently hired a private investigator to research my daily routines, social connections, and financial habits. He'd been in contact with my doctor's office, claiming concern about my mental state and requesting copies of medical records. Most horrifying, he'd been keeping a detailed log of supposed incidents demonstrating my incompetence, incidents that I now realized were either completely fabricated or normal lapses that everyone experiences. One entry read, March 15th, mother called, asking for help finding her car keys. Found them in refrigerator. Possible sign of cognitive decline. I remembered that day clearly. I'd been carrying groceries and set my keys down while putting ice cream away, then forgot where I'd placed them. Anyone might have done the same thing, but Marcus had twisted this ordinary moment into evidence of mental deterioration. Another entry. April 2nd. Mother seemed confused about day of the week during phone call. Had to remind her about book club meeting. That was completely false. I've never missed a book club meeting or been confused about my schedule. Marcus had fabricated this incident entirely. As I continued reading, a horrifying pattern emerged. Every kind gesture, every visit, every expression of renewed interest in my life had been calculated moves in an elaborate plan to gain control of my finances and independence. The son I thought was finally reconnecting with me had actually been systematically building a case to have me declared incompetent. The folder contained timeline projections showing when Marcus planned to file for conservatorship, estimated costs for placing me in assisted living, and financial projections for managing what he called inherited assets. He had reduced me to a column of numbers on a spreadsheet, a problem to be managed rather than a mother to be loved. Bruno wandered over and rested his head against my leg, sensing my distress. Even these dog's animals I'd known for less than a week showed more genuine affection than my own son had demonstrated in months. The irony was not lost on me. I felt completely broken, violated in a way I'd never experienced before. The betrayal cut deeper than any romantic disappointment or friendship loss I'd ever endured. This was my child, the person I'd loved unconditionally since the moment of his birth, systematically plotting to steal my independence and dignity for financial gain. Forcing myself to continue reading, I discovered the final pieces of Marcus's calculated puzzle. Hidden beneath the legal documents were financial records that revealed his true motivation for this elaborate deception. Investment statements showed significant losses from failed business ventures I'd known nothing about. Marcus had apparently invested heavily in a startup company that collapsed spectacularly, leaving him with substantial debt and margin calls on his stock portfolio. Credit card statements revealed a lifestyle funded by borrowed money, expensive dinners, luxury vacations, technology, purchases that far exceeded what even his successful salary could support. Most damning were printouts of text message conversations with someone named Derek, apparently a business partner in the failed venture. These messages revealed a side of Marcus I'd never seen, callous and calculating in ways that made my blood run cold. The old lady is completely clueless, one message read. She actually thinks I've been reconnecting because I missed her. It's pathetic how easy this is going to be. Derek had responded, How much do you think you can get? Marcus, House is worth at least 300,000 plus she's got about 50 grand in savings. She doesn't even realize I know about. Should be enough to cover my losses and get me back to even. Maybe more if I can stretch out the nursing home timeline. And she has no idea. None. She's so desperate for attention she'd believe anything. All that guilt about us growing apart makes her eager to please. I've been playing the loving son role perfectly. She eats up every minute of it. The messages continued with Marcus laughing about my trusting nature and sharing strategies for documenting fake evidence of my mental decline. He had secretly recorded phone conversations edited to make me sound confused. He'd taken photos of my house during visits, focusing on any minor clutter or maintenance needs to suggest I couldn't properly care for my living space. Even more disturbing, I found records of Marcus contacting neighbors and acquaintances, subtly planting seeds of concern about my well-being. He'd spoken with Mrs. Patterson next door, suggesting he was worried about my memory. He'd called the library where I work, expressing concerns about my reliability, and asking them to notify him if I missed shifts or seemed confused. The scope of his manipulation was breathtaking. For months, he'd been systematically undermining my reputation and independence while simultaneously positioning himself as the concerned, loving son trying to help his aging mother. Every person in my life had been turned into an unwitting accomplice in his plan. One document outlined his complete strategy. Obtain conservatorship within 90 days of returning from Denver. Sell my house immediately, liquidate my savings to pay his debts, and place me in the cheapest nursing facility he could find. Financial projections showed he planned to provide me with the absolute minimum allowance required by law, keeping the rest of my assets for himself. There was even a timeline for visiting me once placed in the nursing home, monthly visits for the first year to maintain appearances, then gradually reducing contact until I became just another elderly person abandoned by family. He had calculated exactly how little effort he could invest in my care while avoiding legal scrutiny. Reading these cold, calculated plans for disposing of me felt like watching my own murder being plotted. This wasn't just financial fraud. It was the complete destruction of my life, my dignity, my freedom. And it was being orchestrated by the person I loved more than anyone else in the world. But as devastating as this discovery was, it also sparked something else inside me. Determination. Marcus had made a crucial mistake. He'd underestimated his mother completely. The woman he dismissed as desperate and clueless had actually raised him to be strong, independent, and resourceful. Unfortunately for him, those traits worked both ways. As I closed the folder and sat in the quiet darkness with only the dogs for company, I began planning my own strategy. Marcus had taught me something valuable tonight. Sometimes the people closest to you are the ones you need to protect yourself from most carefully. But he was about to learn that his mother was far from the helpless victim he'd imagined. The game had changed completely, and I was no longer playing defense. My first priority was protecting the evidence. Using my phone, I carefully photographed every single document in the folder, making sure each image was clear and readable. I uploaded the photos to my personal email account and created backup copies on a cloud storage service Marcus had helped me set up months earlier. The irony wasn't lost on me that his own technical assistance was now being used against him. Next, I replaced everything in the folder exactly as I'd found it, ensuring Marcus would have no idea his plan had been discovered. Let him continue believing his mother was naive and unsuspecting. That illusion would work to my advantage now. Sleep was impossible, so I spent the remaining hours before dawn researching elder abuse laws and conservatorship procedures online. What I learned both terrified and empowered me. Marcus's plan was unfortunately not uncommon. Thousands of elderly Americans fall victim to financial abuse by their own family members every year. But there were legal protections available for people wise enough to use them. At 8 the next morning, I called Davidson Legal Services and requested an immediate consultation with attorney Rebecca Thompson, someone the internet reviews described as a fierce advocate for elderly rights. I explained that I needed urgent advice about protecting myself from potential conservatorship abuse, and she agreed to see me that afternoon. Before leaving for the appointment, I completed the morning routine with Bruno and Zeus as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I was no longer a trusting mother caring for her son's beloved pets. I was gathering intelligence in enemy territory, and every moment in this house had become part of my counter-surveillance operation. The consultation with Attorney Thompson exceeded my expectations. A sharp woman in her 40s who specialized in elder law, she reviewed my photographed evidence with the focused intensity of a prosecutor building a criminal case. "Mrs. Henderson," she said after examining the documents, "what your son is planning constitutes elder abuse fraud and potentially criminal conspiracy. But you have several advantages. First, you discovered his plan before he could execute it. Second, you have extensive documentation of his intentions. Third, you're clearly mentally competent and financially responsible, making his claims of incompetence obviously fraudulent." She outlined an immediate protection strategy. We would file preemptive legal documents establishing my mental competency and explicitly refusing any conservatorship attempts by Marcus. We would change my banking information and move assets to accounts he couldn't access. Most importantly, we would prepare criminal charges for attempted elder fraud, which could result in significant legal consequences for Marcus. "I want you to understand," Attorney Thompson explained, "once we begin this process, your relationship with your son will be permanently damaged. Are you prepared for that reality?" The question hung in the air for several moments. Despite everything I'd discovered, Marcus was still my child. The little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who cried when his goldfish died, who hugged me tight before his first day of school. But that child had grown into a man willing to destroy his own mother's life for money. The Marcus I'd loved no longer existed, if he ever had. "He ended our relationship the moment he decided to betray me," I replied. "I'm just protecting myself from a criminal who happens to share my DNA." Over the next week, while Marcus remained blissfully unaware in Denver, I systematically dismantled his entire plan. I changed banks and moved my assets to a new institution across town. I updated my will with specific language preventing Marcus from inheriting anything if he attempted to gain conservatorship. I obtained written statements from my doctor-employer and neighbors confirming my mental competency and independence. Most satisfying, I hired my own private investigator to research Marcus's financial situation and business dealings. What we discovered was even worse than the documents had suggested. He owed money to several dangerous people, had committed tax fraud to hide his losses, and was facing potential criminal charges related to his failed business venture. His desperation to access my money wasn't just greed, it was survival. Armed with this information, Attorney Thompson and I crafted our final strategy. We would allow Marcus to return home and begin executing his plan, but instead of finding a vulnerable victim, he would walk directly into a legal trap that would end his freedom rather than mine. The most difficult part was continuing to play the role of oblivious mother during our daily phone calls. Marcus would call each evening from Denver, asking about the dogs and making casual conversation. Now I could hear the calculation behind every word, the way he subtly probed for information about my activities and mental state. "How are you feeling, Mom?" he asked during one call. "You sound tired. Are you remembering to take your vitamins?" Before my discovery, I might have appreciated his concern. Now I recognized it as evidence gathering, setting up future claims that I'd seemed confused or unwell during our conversations. "I'm feeling wonderful," I replied cheerfully. "Taking care of Bruno and Zeus has been such a joy. I've been thinking this might be good practice for when I'm ready to get a dog of my own." I could almost hear his calculations shifting, worried that a pet adoption might demonstrate independence and competency rather than decline. These conversations became a chess match where he thought he was playing against an amateur, unaware that I'd been studying his strategy for days. As Marcus's return date approached, I felt strangely calm. The initial devastation of betrayal had transformed into cold determination. My son had taught me an important lesson about trust and verification. Now it was my turn to teach him about consequences. Marcus returned on a Sunday afternoon exactly 2 weeks after leaving for Denver. I greeted him at the door with a warm hug and genuine enthusiasm, though the emotions behind my smile had nothing to do with missed affection and everything to do with anticipated justice. "Mom, you look wonderful," he said, studying my face carefully. "How did everything go?" "Perfectly," I replied, leading him into the living room where Bruno and Zeus were ecstatic about their owner's return. The dogs were angels, and I've enjoyed every minute. Your home is beautiful, Marcus. You've built such a successful life. For the next hour, we maintained the charade of normal family conversation. Marcus asked detailed questions about my daily routine, whether I'd had any problems remembering feeding schedules or dog walking times. He inquired about my sleep patterns, whether I'd felt confused about anything, if I'd had any difficulty managing the house systems. I answered every question perfectly, describing a completely competent 2-week experience while Marcus grew increasingly frustrated with my obvious mental clarity and independence. This wasn't fitting his narrative of a declining mother who needed intervention. "You know, Mom," he said finally, "I've been thinking about your living situation. That house is getting pretty big for just you, and I worry about you managing everything alone." Here it was the opening move in his conservatorship strategy. Time to spring my trap. "Actually, Marcus, I've been thinking about that too," I replied, reaching into my purse and withdrawing a small digital recorder. "Could you tell me more about your concerns? I'd love to understand exactly what problems you think I'm having." His face changed immediately, suspicion replacing false concern. "Why are you recording this?" "Oh, just for my own records. You know how forgetful I've become lately." I smiled sweetly. "Please continue. Tell me about these problems you've noticed." Marcus began backpedaling suddenly, uncertain about his script, but it was too late. Attorney Thompson had coached me on exactly how to lead him into admissions that would destroy his credibility in any legal proceeding. Over the next 30 minutes, I methodically guided Marcus into revealing his entire plan. I expressed confusion about financial matters, asked for his help managing my affairs, and suggested maybe he was right about me needing assistance. The more vulnerable I appeared, the more confident he became until he was essentially dictating his conservatorship strategy into my recorder. "I think we should start by having you evaluated by a doctor," he suggested, "just to establish a baseline of your cognitive function. And maybe I should help you organize your finances, make sure everything is in order." "That's so thoughtful of you," I replied. "I suppose you'd need access to my bank accounts and legal documents to help me properly." "Exactly. I've already researched some excellent assisted living facilities that could provide better care than you can manage at home. With the equity in your house, we could afford really nice accommodations." Perfect. He'd just confessed to pre-planning my institutionalization and selling my home statements that would devastate his credibility in court. When I felt I had sufficient recorded evidence, I turned off the device and looked directly into Marcus's eyes. "Thank you for being so honest about your plans, son. Now let me be equally honest about mine." I placed the manila folder on the coffee table between us. His face went completely white. "I found this folder with my name on it while I was organizing your office. I've read every document, every email, every text message about your scheme to steal my life and freedom. I've photographed all the evidence and provided copies to my attorney, who has already filed criminal charges against you for attempted elder abuse and fraud." Marcus tried to interrupt, but I continued relentlessly. "I've also discovered your real financial situation. Your failed investments, your debts, your desperate need for money. I know about Derek and your text messages calling me pathetic and clueless. I know about the lies you told my neighbors and my employer. I know everything, Marcus." He began denying everything, claiming the folder contained contingency planning, that he was only trying to help prepare for my future needs. But the recorded conversation had already proven his intent, and my evidence file was too comprehensive for any reasonable denial. "You have two choices," I informed him calmly. "You can face criminal prosecution, which will likely result in imprisonment and complete financial ruin, or you can sign these documents my attorney prepared admitting your intent to defraud me, agreeing to permanent restraining orders, and surrendering any claim to my estate or decision-making authority." Attorney Thompson had anticipated this moment perfectly. The legal documents would protect me permanently, while giving Marcus a chance to avoid prison if he cooperated fully. Marcus's reaction progressed through anger, denial, bargaining, and finally, desperate pleading. He claimed his business pressures had driven him to desperate measures, that he'd never intended to actually hurt me, that he still loved me despite his actions. But love doesn't plan to warehouse your mother in a nursing home while stealing her life savings. Love doesn't fabricate evidence of mental decline. Love doesn't reduce a parent to numbers on a financial spreadsheet. The son I loved would never have done these things, I told him. That person either never existed or died sometime before this plan began. Either way, he's gone, and I'm not interested in mourning him while protecting myself from you." Within 2 hours, Marcus had signed all the documents and left my life forever. The restraining order would prevent any contact, and the admissions of guilt would ensure no court would ever grant him any authority over my affairs. As I watched him drive away from the house that had briefly felt like a bridge between us, I felt surprisingly peaceful. The betrayal still hurt, but the pain was manageable now that I'd taken action to protect myself. I'd learned that sometimes loving someone means accepting that they're no longer worthy of your trust. The weeks following Marcus's departure were initially difficult as I processed the complete dissolution of our relationship and the implications of his betrayal. The grief came in waves, sometimes overwhelming me with sadness for the mother-son bond I thought we'd rebuilt other times, filling me with rage at the calculated nature of his deception. Attorney Thompson connected me with a counselor who specialized in family betrayal trauma, and those sessions proved invaluable for working through my complex emotions. Dr. Sarah Martinez helped me understand that grieving the loss of a relationship that was never real is a unique form of mourning that requires patience and self-compassion. "You're not just grieving the end of your relationship with Marcus," Dr. Martinez explained during one of our early sessions. "You're grieving the realization that the relationship you thought you had was largely fictional. That's a profound loss that takes time to process." The therapy sessions also helped me recognize patterns I'd missed while living through the manipulation. Marcus had been employing classic emotional abuse tactics, love bombing during the reconciliation phase, gaslighting about my memory, and competence and isolation techniques designed to make me dependent on his version of reality. Understanding these patterns intellectually helped reduce the emotional impact of his betrayal. More importantly, the counseling process helped me reclaim confidence in my own judgment and capabilities. Marcus's plan had required convincing me that I was becoming incompetent and unreliable. Even after discovering his deception, part of me wondered whether some of his concerns might have been legitimate. Dr. Martinez helped me recognize this as a common response to gaslighting and worked with me to rebuild trust in my own perceptions and abilities. Within a month, I'd established new routines that emphasized my independence and competence. I joined a senior hiking group that took weekend trips to nearby state parks, demonstrating physical capabilities that contradicted any narrative about declining health. I enrolled in a computer programming class at the community college partly to prove my mental acuity, and partly because I'd discovered I enjoyed learning new technologies. I even adopted a rescue dog, a golden retriever mix named Hope, who became my constant companion and a daily reminder of my capacity for care and responsibility. The legal resolution proceeded smoothly. Marcus complied with all the restraining order requirements and made no attempts to contact me or contest the criminal charges. Attorney Thompson suspected he was too focused on avoiding prosecution for his business fraud to risk additional legal complications. Several months later, I learned through public records that he'd been sentenced to community service and probation for tax evasion related to his failed investments, confirming that my suspicions about his financial desperation had been accurate. More satisfying than legal victory was the personal transformation I experienced throughout this process. The woman who'd been so grateful for her son's renewed attention had evolved into someone who valued her independence above the approval of others. I established new friendships based on genuine mutual respect rather than family obligation or emotional manipulation. My book club became a source of intellectual stimulation and social connection. My work at the library expanded into volunteer literacy programs that gave me a sense of purpose and community contribution. Most importantly, I learned to distinguish between loneliness and solitude. Before Marcus's deception, I'd confused being alone with being lonely, making me vulnerable to manipulation from anyone who offered attention and connection. Now I understood that solitude could be peaceful and fulfilling when it was chosen rather than imposed. The quality of relationships mattered far more than their quantity. I also developed new practices for evaluating trust and setting boundaries. Never again would I mistake intensity for intimacy or attention for affection. Future relationships would be built gradually with trust earned through consistent actions rather than granted automatically based on family ties or emotional appeals. One year after discovering Marcus's folder, I received an indirect message through Attorney Thompson. Marcus wanted to know if I'd be willing to meet for a supervised conversation, claiming he wanted to apologize and make amends. After consideration, I declined. Some betrayals are too fundamental to repair, and some relationships are too toxic to resurrect even with professional mediation. Instead, I chose to focus my energy on building positive connections with people who demonstrated genuine care and respect. I began volunteering with an elder abuse prevention organization, sharing my story to help other seniors recognize warning signs of financial manipulation by family members. This work felt meaningful in ways that family obligation never had, creating value from my painful experience. The house that had felt too big for just me gradually filled with evidence of a rich, independent life. Hope's toys scattered across the living room, books from my expanded reading interests stacked on every surface. Photos from hiking trips and social gatherings replaced the family portraits that had once dominated my decor. The space reflected who I was becoming rather than who I'd been expected to be. Friends sometimes asked whether I missed having family connection, whether the isolation was difficult. The question always surprised me because I didn't feel isolated at all. My life was full of people who chose to include me rather than people who felt obligated to tolerate me. The difference was profound and liberating. As I reflect on this experience now, sitting in my comfortable home with Hope sleeping at my feet, I feel grateful rather than bitter. Marcus's betrayal taught me invaluable lessons about self-advocacy, boundary setting, and the difference between genuine and manipulative relationships. The pain was necessary education that made me stronger and wiser. I also recognize that this story could have ended very differently if I hadn't trusted my instincts about that folder. Thousands of seniors lose their independence and dignity every year to family members who exploit their trust and vulnerability. My discovery was partly accidental, but my response was entirely intentional. I chose to fight back rather than become a victim, and that choice changed everything. The folder with my name on it was meant to be evidence of my incompetence and justification for my institutionalization. Instead, it became the catalyst for reclaiming my power and rebuilding my life on my own terms. Sometimes, the worst betrayals create opportunities for the greatest growth if we're brave enough to seize them. Now, instead of being a cautionary tale about elder abuse, my story has become an inspiration for other seniors facing similar challenges. I speak regularly at community centers and senior groups, sharing strategies for protecting independence and recognizing manipulation tactics. Each person who leaves those presentations feeling more confident about their ability to protect themselves makes Marcus's betrayal feel worthwhile. The most profound lesson I learned is that family is defined by behavior, not biology. Blood relationships don't guarantee love, loyalty, or respect, but chosen relationships built on mutual care and genuine affection can provide the connection and support that everyone deserves. My life is richer now than it ever was when I was trying to maintain a relationship with someone who saw me as a resource rather than a person. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and self-protection? How do you know when someone's concern is genuine versus manipulative? Please share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't hesitate to like this video if it reminded you to trust your instincts about the people in your life. Subscribe for more stories about finding strength in difficult situations, and share this with anyone who might benefit from learning about elder abuse warning signs. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that it's never too late to advocate for yourself and demand the respect you deserve. Stay strong, stay vigilant, and never let anyone convince you that your independence isn't worth protecting.